Weltweit sind Journalistinnen und Journalisten immer häufiger Repressionen, Zensur, Verfolgungen und Angriffen ausgesetzt. Und das nur, weil sie in ihrer Funktion als Medienschaffende berichten. Viele JournalistInnen sind wegen ihrer Berichterstattung sogar gezwungen, ihre Heimat zu verlassen und aus dem Exil weiterzuarbeiten. Aber was bedeutet es, aus dem Exil über das eigene Heimatland zu schreiben? Welche Herausforderungen, Chancen und Risiken sind mit Exiljournalismus verbunden? Genau darum geht es heute in unserer Podcastfolge. Ich spreche dafür heute ausnahmsweise auf Englisch mit Sergey Lukashevskiy. Er ist russischer Historiker und lebt seit 2022 im Exil in Deutschland, nachdem er sich in Russland kritisch über den Ukraine-Krieg geäußert hat und deshalb das Land verlassen musste. So with me today in our podcast studio is Sergey Lukashevskiy, a Russian historian who has been living in exile in Germany for the past 3 years. Welcome, Mr. Lukashevskiy. Thank you for taking the time to be here with me today.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very grateful to be with you.
I have already mentioned that you have been living in Germany for 3 years now, but you also work as a journalist here, which is going to be the topic of today's podcast, Exile Journalism. First, I would like to talk to you about your life and your work in Russia, because you were in charge of the Sakharov Center in Moscow. Have you ever been active in journalism before, while you were still living in Russia?
Yeah. For most time of my working career, I wasn't particular, not only a journalist, but an historian. I was a manager and coordinator of human rights NGOs, human rights NGO project. I started in 1991 when I was in the last class of my high school. In Memorial Society, maybe you know, it is the main non-governmental organization for preserving the memory of the totalitarian repressions in former USSR. But since 1999, I started to work with human rights organizations. I worked for Moscow Helsinki Group. It's the oldest, one of the oldest Russian human rights organizations with the roots in mid of 70s, last century. And I was responsible for preparing the yearly All Russia report about the situation with human rights. And so it was partly a kind of journalistic work, because we are preparing reports, briefings, and articles about the situation with human rights in Russia, and published these reports and these articles, and also in Russian media. And then in my next organization, Demos Center, we started to prepare a kind of media monitoring about the human rights. Because the situation with the freedom of speech in Russia in that time, in zeros, was much better than today, and there were a lot of independent media, both in Moscow or St. Petersburg, but also in various regions of Russia. So there was a lot of information about the violations of human rights. And we monitor all this information and prepared daily digests for our subscribers. And also we started a project with comments on the main issues concerning the situation with human rights and democracy. And I took comments of the main Russian experts, journalists and academician people and human rights activists and so on. And also when I started to be a director of the Sakharov Center in Moscow, we, besides our archival, museum and so on, educational work, we had one of the first projects in YouTube, which called Talking Heads, with the recorded discussions between experts about the pressing issues of the politics, culture, and so on. So I was in touch with journalistic work, but my main responsibility was to manage the organization, manage the Sakharov Center, which was one of the main independent venues in Russia, with our own archives, museum, and which was the most important public space for the public discussions, conferences, and so on.
For those of our listeners who don't know maybe who Andrei Sakharov is, I think some people, it might ring a bell for some people, or some people are familiar with the Sakharov Prize as well. Could you tell us briefly who Sakharov was, for those who might not know him?
Of course, it could be the long conversation, especially about Andrei Sakharov, but I will try to describe this person in several sentences. Sakharov was one of the main scientists in Russian nuclear project, in Soviet nuclear project. He invented Russian hydrogen bomb. And till nowadays, his construction is the most powerful hydrogen bomb in the world, so-called Tsar Bomba. And after the Caribbean crisis, he understood that as a scientist, he could invent the really very deadly weapon. But neither he personally nor anybody else except Soviet generals and Communist Party leaders would control the using of this weapon. And that would be the threat, not only for the country or several countries, but for the whole humanity, for the whole civilization. And he started to discuss with the authorities about the democratic reforms in Soviet Union to establish the democratic control under the using of the nuclear weapons. But since that time, he step by step he was becoming the human rights defender. Before 1968, he was a secret scientist. Nobody knew about him. And since he started to step forward with some articles, with some announcements and so on, he became well known and started to receive a lot of applications from all around the country about the violations of human rights. And he became the informal leader of dissident movement and human rights movement in USSR. And in 1975, he received the Nobel Peace Prize. And finally, after he started to criticize the Soviet invasion to Afghanistan, he was put in exile in Nizhny Novgorod. And he was treated really badly. During this exile, he had several hunger strikes. And several times he was in very bad condition, very near to death. And finally, he became one of the leaders of the democratic movement during Gorbachev's perestroika. But unfortunately, he died in the end of 1989, at the peak of his political career and his popularity. And after him, the main prize, the main human rights prize of European Parliament was named. And now we have the Sakharov Prize of European Parliament.
So the Sakharov Center in Moscow that you worked for, that you were in charge of, was a way of preserving this legacy of Andrei Sakharov, was it?
Yes. Our main aim was to preserve his legacy, but not only his documents and history of his life, but also his values. And so, because the main so-called Sakharov triad was peace, progress, and human rights, we are involved in agenda of strengthening civil society, support human rights defenders, and also another one very important topic for Sakharov was the free discussion. And so Sakharov Center, till the start of full-scale invasion of Russia to Ukraine, was one of the very few places, uncensored places in Russia, where almost all the topics could be discussed.
You mentioned that the situation in Russia was more liberal in the beginning of the years after 2000 compared to now. How has your work changed, or in what way did you experience that the government or the government's policies regulated and controlled your work more strictly?
The situation 25 years ago, in the beginning of zeros, was not a bit more liberal, but much more liberal. Because in the beginning of zeros, Russians had independent TV channels, huge number of independent newspapers and websites, and the situation was becoming worse and worse during all the zeros. But the crucial point was 2011, 2012, since the start of the second time Putin's coming into power. He was a president from 2000 to 2008, and then mostly nominally, but nevertheless, the president was Dmitry Medvedev, who was, despite of his today image, was the more liberal than Putin during his presidency. And Putin was the head of the government. And in the end of 2011, Putin decided to become a president again. And the huge protests started in Moscow and several other big cities with hundreds of thousands of people who came to the street protesting against the frauds during the election and protesting against Putin as a future president. And since that time, the situation with all human rights, especially all political rights, started to become much and much worse from year to year. And that means that on the one hand, Russian government, Russian authorities invented so-called foreign agents law, and Sakharov Center was the eighth organization that was put on the list, and we was put on this list because of our free discussions. Because some experts during these discussions, of course, criticized the authorities and their policy. Russian authorities recognized it as a political activity. And together with the support from abroad, and our main support from abroad was from the Andrei Sakharov Foundation, which was established in the United States. It is a private foundation which was established in the United States in 1990 by the friends and supporters of Andrei Sakharov. And so the combination of these 2 points, so-called political activity and the funds from abroad, we was proclaimed as a foreign agent. And that means a lot of bureaucracy and also the daily threat of being fined. And firstly, we were fined because we didn't put ourselves to the list of the foreign agents, because we needed to know by ourselves that we are foreign agents, and the authorities meant that we needed to put to understand our status and to put ourselves to the list by ourselves. But that was not the main problem of ours. The main problem was the attacks by so-called by vigilants, so-called Cossacks, the volunteers of Donbass and others, and who attacked. We were one of the maybe the only one venue in Moscow, for example, who gave its venues for the LGBT community meetings. And that meetings were attacked by these crowds of people who blocked the buildings, blocked the entrances, and tried to attack people, attack the participants of the events. And also we had in 2016 an exhibition of documentary photography. And at this exhibition, there were 2 series of photos about the conflict on the southeast Ukraine, declared by the vigilants as a supporting of the enemies of Russian people, enemies of Russian, and so on. And where attacks, this exhibition was destroyed, and we were under the siege for several days. And I received threats that I would be killed if we will prolong such an activity, and our venues would be burned down, and so on and so forth. And in such a situation, we lived till the beginning on the full-scale invention, because on the one hand, we had an opportunity to be active, to provide these discussions and human rights education and stuff like that. But on the other, we were constantly under pressure from the juridical side and also from the security side. But after the start of full-scale invention, Russian authorities adopted new laws about so-called fake news and discreditation of the army, and it became absolutely clear that there is no possibility to discuss the really pressing questions, because the most pressing problem, pressing issue of the time was the war in Ukraine. So our organization published the announcement with the criticizing the invention, criticizing the war. It was before the adoption of these new laws. But finally, after several months, the government took away our premises. We had a free rent from the city since the mid of 1990s. And after that, our organization was forcibly liquidated by court. And at the same time, I was accused of disseminating fakes through my own page in Facebook for saying something like, one of the posts I was accused for was something like that. Today, Russian army and Russian authorities make in Ukraine the same crimes that they made during the Chechen wars. And besides of such kind of posts, I was sentenced to 8 years of prison. So if I will cross the border of Russia or Russian allied countries like Belarus or even Armenia and so on, I would be arrested and put to jail.
So you couldn't go back to Russia at all at the moment?
Yeah, of course.
Impossible. Yeah.
Of course. Fortunately, I'm now in Germany since the March of 2022 and have an opportunity to work from here.
How did you deal with this sort of intimidation? Because I think for us in Germany, it's very hard to believe, and it's very hard to understand the kind of intimidation that you had to face during all of these years, and how you dealt with that.
The most simple answer was that I used to manage it somehow. Of course, I waked up every morning with the question if there is some letter from the Ministry of Justice in my mailbox, or maybe some new attack from somebody, or some new graffiti on the walls of our center, or something like that. And now maybe from the one hand I could breathe a bit freely, but on the other hand, I'm abroad. The Russian authorities cannot caught me and so on. But, for example, I got to know about my criminal case because the apartments of my parents were searched in the morning. My mother write me a message from the she entered. She had an opportunity to close the door of the bathroom and wrote me a message that there is a search in the apartments. And I didn't live in these apartments for years, but I was officially registered there. Mm-hmm. It was the normal situation in Russia. And so all my relatives, all my friends are under the threat because of my criminal case. Because the practice of Russian authorities is that if they open the criminal case against somebody, all his friends, all his colleagues, all his parents could be searched. And during these searches, they take away all the gadgets. And if they find something in these gadgets, that could be the reason for the new criminal cases. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not really afraid about myself for now, but I'm afraid about my friends, about my colleagues. My parents, fortunately, are also abroad, and they have also no opportunity to return to Russia because of these threats. And there are several examples in today's Russia. Then the parents of the political immigrants were accused in something criminal, maybe not concerning some words or some political issues, but something. And so they also under the threat too. But at the same time, I try to be psychologically stable, thinking about the people who are really in prison now, because among them there are a lot of people whom I know personally. For example, Mikhail Krieger is sentenced for his anti-war, post-anti-war proclamations for 8 years of prison. He decided not to leave Russia, and so he's in prison now. And another one who was the Alexei Gorinov, who was the municipal deputy of one of the Russian regions, is now in prison, and fortunately he had tuberculosis. He is very seriously ill, and he is in prison in very bad conditions. So I think about all these people every day, and so usually when I'm asked, "How are you?" I'm answered, "Yeah, I'm okay." Comparing with others in today's circumstances, comparing with Ukrainians who are day by day bombed by Russian aircrafts, and also comparing with my colleagues inside the country, and many of them, for example, they awaken every day at 6 o'clock, because 6 o'clock in the morning it is the usual time of the searches of the FSB and police and so on. And so they are awakening every day in this time because of this threat. And so comparing to them, I'm absolutely okay. I have a quite comfortable life in Berlin. I have an opportunity to work and so on.
But you still live with that fear. I think it's very impressive, the way that you're dealing with it, because it's, I think for us, very hard to imagine what that must be like, because we obviously can't relate because we're in a very privileged position. So I think it is very, very impressive, definitely. You were already in Germany when the Sakharov Center was officially closed in Russia, so you didn't experience it personally, and you just found out about it here, is it?
Yes, I was already in Germany when the Sakharov Center was closed, but it was really absolutely clear for me that all the independent venues would be closed, early or later. Everything, all the official institutions would be liquidated or closed, because it is the new page of the history of this authoritarian regime, and such a cruel attack on the neighbor, of course, means at the same time the attack against the civil society inside the country. And now we understood that the poisoning of Alexei Navalny and the liquidating of Memorial Society in the end of 2021 was a kind of preparations before the starting of full-scale invasion. Of course, not the main one, but important for the authorities. It was important for them to destroy all kinds of networks, all kinds of the organized, not even political opposition, but civil protests, civil resilience. But in fact, the civil society in Russia is still alive, but unfortunately without the public places, without the media which could freely operate inside the country. But it exists, and hundreds and thousands of people are involved in the helping to political prisoners, helping to Ukrainian refugees, collecting and Ukrainian prisoners, because one of the main of today's human rights problems, which is not on the front line of the war, is the thousands of Ukrainians who are imprisoned in Russia in the very bad conditions, much worse than the Russian political prisoners, with the enormous tortures, with the day-by-day hunger. And Russian activists try to help them, providing food, providing some very simple but important things to the prisons, and that is really dangerous for them. Because from time to time, one or another is searched, arrested, or criminal cases is opened against him or her. And but the civil society is still alive, and all my work here in Germany is I try to support them by media work, to support them by other kinds of work.
Do you have hope, or do you think that someday you could return to Russia, maybe after Putin is gone, after the war in Ukraine will have ended? And do you think that your country can or could become more liberal again, the way it was in the beginning of the 2000s?
I think yes, because I was born in 1975. I remember quite clear what was the life in Soviet Union. And also I remember how it changed in several years. And on the one hand, all such regimes look like they were very strong and they could be alive for dozens of years. There is a very good title, one of the books about the Soviet society. That was forever until it ended. So I don't think that I will have an opportunity to return to Russia after the end of the war, because it seems that the war will end before the Putin would be out of power. But I have strong hope, and not only hope, but the hope based on the historical experience, that after the end of his rule, the situation will be more liberal. I don't know how much. I don't know. Maybe like after Stalin's death. Maybe there will be new Gorbachev, or maybe even new democratic revolution. But in Russia, Russian people, unfortunately, don't have a real tradition of strong democracy. But they have real demand for justice. And they could be turned away from this demand for justice by all these imperial myths and a kind of resentment and so on, such kind of feelings. But Putin started this war, first of all, not because his ideas about Ukraine, that it is not a real state and Ukrainians not a real nations. It was a kind of decor. It was a kind of ideological basis. But the real problem was that every time the war in Ukraine started in 2014, that was a time of the lowest level of his support inside the country. And the full-scale invasion started, and the new period of the lowest support of his power, of his ruling, because there are a lot of contradictions, social contradictions, because of the enormous inequality in Russian society, with a very small number of very rich people and a very huge number of poor people. And so when this regime ended, all these contradictions became the main issue for the Russian society, and that could be the chance for the democratization. In fact, all the experts could say that there is no any democracy in Russia, and it is true. But for example, several months ago, in one small city, because the authority had to provide elections because of constitutions, like kind of ceremony, there will be the main candidate from the ruling party and a secretary of one of the official departments, like a spoiler, without any chance to win. But she won because the ordinary people want a change of their life. want a change of the authorities. They don't want to have only one person in power year by year and so on. But unfortunately, there is no democratic institutions and strong pressure of the secret police and so on. And if there would be a chance that this pressure of this regime became not so hard, the people's demand for the justice, for the changing of power, will be on the table.
So you are, in a way, optimistic about Russia's future at all?
Yes, because Vladimir Putin now is constructing new military regime. A new military regime means that there will be no development of day-by-day life, of health system, of education, and so on. For now, something like 40% of the budget is the military expenses. And that is not healthy for the society and for the economy. And so at one moment, I don't know when, because it depends of enormous number of factors. Price, oils, the situation in the United States, the situation in Europe, and so on, the situation in China, because nowadays Putin's regime is backed by China. But it is absolutely possible that someday this regime will end, and it will end with the crisis. And that would be the moment when the people's demand for justice will have an opportunity to build a democracy. I don't know when. So I'm pessimistic about the next years. But historically, I'm optimistic, because nobody can stop the progress. Nobody. It could stop it for some time, for several years, but not forever.
I would now like to talk about your work in Germany, because the Sakharov Center is closed now, as we've already discussed, but you work for Radio Sakharov now. Are the two related, and what topics do you focus on? Because as far as I'm concerned, you focus not only on the war in Ukraine, but also on social issues and social inequalities in Russia that you already mentioned.
First of all, the basic idea of the Radio Sakharov is quite the same as the idea of the Sakharov Center as a public venue, with such a difference that Sakharov Center was a venue and Radio Sakharov is a podcast platform. The Sakharov Center was an open venue for different kinds of civic activists, from libertarians to anarchists and feminists and so on. And just the same, the Radio Sakharov. It is fulfilled not only by our own content, but also by the content of more than 50 our partners. And among them, there are huge media outlets like BBC Russian or Medusa, but also a small project which is produced by the small activist group. And these projects are usually it is about the violence against women, home violence, and also about cultural resistance, not only against the war, but also against this far-right shift inside Russia too. So we have a very different content. And yes, we because it is radio. When you have a button and you could push it and have a radio from hour to hour in your headphones or on your notebook and so on. Of course, it is impossible to broadcast all the day about the war, because if you would do it, a person will become tired quite soon, because nobody could listen into all this information, can listen into this information about bombing, killings, killed children, killed civilians, and so on from hour to hour. So we have a small part of our broadcasting about the war, and the other is about historical topics, cultural topics, social issues, and so on. Because we provide a sphere of normality. Because the main problem of the person inside Russia is that he's surrounded by propaganda on the one side and the silence of people from another. Because ordinary people in Russia don't want to discuss the war and human rights violations. Partly because they don't want to deal with it, partly because they are afraid. And so Radio Sakharov is a part of normality. And today's censorship in Russia is not only about the war. It is also about feminist issues. It is also about LGBT people. It is also about several historical issues. You cannot compare Nazi totalitarian regime and Soviet totalitarian regime because of the threat of being criminally accused, and we have an opportunity to discuss all these topics with our audience. And we have a podcast about the documentary theater, about the history of censorship, and also about the civic society, how people are living today, and both inside the country and outside the country. So how people try to preserve the historical memory, not only about the repressions, but the local history of their regions, for example, because the agenda of propaganda is about the state, the huge, glorious and strong state, which was fighting all its history and won all its enemies and so on. So everything is important. The focus on the local problems, the focus on the rights of different groups, the focus on history and so on.
So the way I understand it is a platform that allows you to address issues that couldn't be discussed publicly in Russia.
Yes.
Exactly. And what is your role concretely? Like, do you record the podcasts? Do you script them? Or what exactly is your part?
I'm doing everything. I'm coordinating the search for the possible new partners, and we are negotiating to establish new partnerships, not only by putting the new podcast on our platform, but also by doing the podcast together. I'm recording our own podcasts. One is about the current political situation, one analytical podcast with the head of some new Russian in exile think tank, Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And also I'm producing a podcast which discussing the controversial and pressing moral issues concerning the day-to-day politics. I do everything except the technical things.
Okay.
I cannot edit audio or video, but or designing the covers, but everything else.
Around, kind of.
Yeah. Well, our team is quite small, only 5 people, and together with these 5 colleagues, we are producing the radio with 12 hours of content broadcasting and other 12 hours with music broadcasting. And music, it's not only entertainment, because a significant part of Russian language music, rock music, and then something is banned by Russian authorities for today. Not only anti-war songs, anti-war compositions, but also a part of the musicians was labeled as a foreign agent, and so there is no opportunity for Russians to listen to their music by censored media inside the country. And so we have 24 hours a day broadcasting with 6 people. It's very little team.
Are the other 5 people that you're working with, are they in Germany as well, or have they left Russia? They probably have left Russia, I suppose.
Yes, all of them are outside the country, but not all of them are in Germany. 3 of us are in Germany, 2 in Georgia, and also, I'm mistaken, 4 of us. 4 of us for now is in Germany and 2 in Georgia.
And how does this affect your work when you're not physically at the same place, but you kind of have to coordinate all of that and organize it online, I suppose?
Fortunately for us, but unfortunately for people, we have an experience during the COVID time, because we started to coordinate all the work of the Sakharov Center online and have an experience of moving all our activity online. So, of course, it's better to have an opportunity together in one room and to discuss in person everything. But we used to do it online, and I cannot say that there is a huge problem to coordinate it online. We have weekly meetings and a lot of connections during the day and so on.
COVID prepared you in a way.
Yes.
Unfortunately, yeah. What feedback do you get from Russians, from the audience that you want to address, but also from people in Germany maybe, for your work?
Our radio is in Russian. We don't have English or German broadcasting, so all the feedback is from the Russian language people, also in Germany and in other countries. And the most popular kind of feedback that is grateful that it is an opportunity to have so many interesting and lovely podcasts on the one platform. That was our main idea, and that was our main feedback. And but of course, every particular podcast have a lot of different comments because we are discussing really pressing issues, and not all our listeners agree with us in something. We have the same values, but we are not agree some particular events. But that is normal situation, and we are doing this for the free discussion, for the opportunity to have free discussion about how the things are going on.
So do you primarily reach Russians in Russia or in Europe, just Russian-speaking people in general?
At the beginning of our work, we saw that the most part of our listeners are inside the country, something about 60 or 65%. But for now, it is a problem to check how many people are using our content from inside the country, because Russians have to use VPN. Mm-hmm. And if you are using VPN, you cannot see from what country is the visitor of viewer or listener came. It could be Netherlands or Kazakhstan or whatever. Yeah. So unfortunately for now, we don't have a clear number. No, not numbers. We of course have clear numbers, but we don't have a clear geotagging of people who are listening us because of this censorship and using VPN.
How many people do you reach with Radio Sakharov? Can you tell?
We are reaching about 100,000 people a month, but also we are a part of so-called satellite Svoboda project with the possible audience of 3.5 million of households. But it is possible audience because it is impossible to check the numbers. The only way is to make some polls inside the country, but it is impossible.
If we were to talk about Radio Sakharov, how do you think it will evolve in the next years? Are there any projects that you're currently working on?
Yeah, we are planning, and we really want to start to produce some explainers about Russian history and about Russia. And we want to go a bit away from the radio broadcasting, podcast broadcasting, and try to use TikTok and other new channels of dissemination of the information, because it is the main problem for today. How to make our audience broader. It's not only our problem, it's a problem of all Russian-speaking media in exile, because we have some strong audience of people who subscribe to us and following us since the 2022, 2023. But for now, the possibility of using YouTube or standard podcast platform unfortunately ended, and we need some new forms, some new channels. And so we will try to look for something else, because Russian authorities are trying to cut Russian people from the exiled media, and that is our main problem.
What can Germany or other European countries as well do concretely to support and to improve exile journalism? You're, for example, a member of Correctiv, an organization that supports exile journalism. But what can Germany, what can other countries specifically do?
The easiest way is to say, please don't cut the grant supporting programs for Russian civil society and Russian media. But understanding that is maybe the easiest way, but not the best way. I could say that the establishing of the partnerships between European media and German media and Russian media outlets would be the best way. And our project is the good example of this, because we are a part of collective, which is giving us more sustainability and more connections with the German journalistic community, and more possibilities to do content and to exchange content, to provide some content concerning Russia, which is important for the European society too. Because in my opinion, the problem for today is not only the need to support the democratic resilience in authoritarian countries, in neighboring European Union totalitarian and authoritarian countries, but also the threat to Europe from these regimes. And even after the war in Ukraine will stop and the fire will stop, the threat won't decrease or even increase for Europe. And it's not only about some sabotage or some escalation of some games with aircrafts on the borders or something like that, but also the pressure through the disseminating destructive narratives and Russian propagandistic narratives. And so it is very important to support the alternative Russian media, not only for the Russians inside the country, but also for the diaspora, because there are something about more than 3 million Russian-speaking people in Germany. And a huge part of them listening and viewing the Russian official content. And that is dangerous for Europe. And so I think the first step is to understand that Russian authoritarianism is a real threat to European Union. Not only the responsibility for Ukraine or responsibility to support democratic activists, but the understanding that today's authoritarianism is a threat to the European values, to European Union and European society. And so that could be a deep cooperation between Russians in exile, media in exile, and German civic society, German media community, to resilience against this authoritarian influence together. Combine efforts, combine knowledge, combine experience. Today, the problem is not that the help is not sufficient. It was very sufficient during the first 2 years, but now it seems to decline, and that is the problem. If it could be on the same level as during the first year of full-scale invention, that was really the good situation. But the problem is not to decrease and to develop the more deep cooperation.
I would also like to know and ask how safe your work in Germany is. Do you feel threatened for what you share on Radio Sakharov?
Of course, I'm under threat of opening new criminal cases, because Radio Sakharov is on the list of foreign agents too. Because Russian authorities think that everything which is produced in Russian language is under the Russian laws. Never mind where you are doing it, in the United States, in Germany, or in Antarctica. If you are producing some content in Russian, you are in the cycle of Russian law. So we are under this law of foreign agent, and of course, one of the demands of this law is to put a very long label, very long phrase of more than 150 signs about this content is produced by the foreign agent, so on. And we, of course, we don't do it, because it would be very strange to be in Germany and to put such such bullshit on our content. But the threat is to have new criminal cases inside the country. And on the one hand, I feel myself for today quite secure in Germany, but I know that I could be the possible aim of Russian authorities, and we know that they could try to poison people, they could try to attack people, And so I'm trying to monitor the situation. For now, it seems to be quite secure, but I'm not sure about tomorrow. But the one particular German thing is really threatened me, that every time I am buying online something, I have to put my address, my real address, on all these Anmeldungs and so on. And so it is absolutely easy to everybody to get to know where I'm living.
Yeah.
And so that could be a real threat. And we tried to me and my other colleagues from Exile tried to discuss with German authorities that maybe could you hide the information about the organizations registered in Germany, or to hide our addresses and so on. But for now, we've no solution.
How easy was it for you when you came to Germany 3 years ago to establish Radio Sakharov? Because you come to a country you don't speak the language. How difficult was it for you to connect with other people and to found Radio Sakharov in this difficult situation?
My luck, or maybe my privilege, was that I have a lot of ties with German organizations and German civic activists before the war. When I came to Germany, my very good friend Wolf Ihrer from Goethe Institute, who was the head of programs of Goethe Institute in Moscow for several years, and we collaborated very much. It was maybe fourth my day in Germany. He called me and asked, "Do you have where to live? Do you have work?" No, I answered, because I was only the fourth day in Germany, and I didn't think about everything. Only that my trip from Russia through Uzbekistan through Tashkent was successful, and in several next days I met David Shraven from Correctiv, and he offered me work. He offered me to elaborate the media project, and that was Radio Sakharov. Finally, and the situation is Correctiv is maybe easier for a person like me, because it is international team with a lot of people from very different countries, from Turkey, from Bangladesh, and so on and so forth. And so, fortunately, I speak English, and so that was an opportunity for me to have a good work relations and good opportunity to work, and also there are a lot of people whom I know from my work in Moscow who speaks not only English but also Russian, and that was very important support. And having all this network with the colleagues from different German organizations, I have this period of adaptation much easier than people from, for example, from not from Moscow or St. Petersburg, but other Russian cities who received so-called humanitarian visa and was put in small German cities and villages. It's much difficult for them to have to adopt in a new country.
Yeah. But your adaptation, I would call it, was facilitated very much by people that already lived here and that supported you at the time.
Yes. At the day the war started, I didn't, and all my family, we didn't have Schengen visas because of COVID. All visas expired.
Yeah.
And we received German Schengen visas for 5 days, so very fast. And had an opportunity to leave the country and came to Germany and receive a living permission here in several months. And all of this, it is because of the help of my friends and colleagues. I have no such an opportunity without them. And for me, for me, the German society is very hospitable. Yeah.
Are you a lot in touch with other Russian journalists or other, like with the Russian-speaking community in Germany? Are you in touch with them a lot, or other journalists that live here in exile as well?
Yes, of course. I'm in touch a lot because the journalistic community, not only in exile, is very strong, and there is such a community called Red Коллегия. It could be translated like editorial room or something like that. It is a community of more than 200 editors-in-chief and journalists from different media, mostly from exile, but not only, also from Russia. And we are meeting together twice a year. And we have an opportunity to have a huge conferences to discuss a lot of questions. And also, of course, there is a community of civic activists and human rights activists from Russia in Berlin. And for me, the problem is that I have very little touch with Russian-speaking people in Germany, with ordinary Russian-speaking people. We have and I feel myself like in a specific bubble. Because there is a great difference between Russian-speaking people who left Russia in 90s or zeros and came not only from Russia but also from Kazakhstan or Belarus or Ukraine, and well-educated Russians who left the country for political reasons during the last 10 years or 15 years. There is a real gap between them. And so I have strong connections, and we are a real community here, but it is something about several hundred people, not more. And my problem is that we don't have enough resources to work for Russians inside the country and to develop the ties and connections with Russian-speaking people inside Germany. It's a problem of resources.
I would now get to the final question. What are your hopes for your time in Germany, for Radio Sakharov, or in general for the next years?
I would like to become a real part of German journalistic community, because when I was in Russia, we strongly work the communication and ties between European society and Russian society. And now being abroad, being in Germany, I think that could be really important to establish the strong cooperation and strong common work between German journalists and Russian journalists and Russian activists to explain Russians about how European democracy works. What is in real life, what is European values in real life, and also to explain Germans what is in reality Russia, what is in reality Russian people. On the one hand, about the threat of Russian authoritarianism, but on the other, that Russian society is not also only the realm of Putin supporters. And there are lots of people who are of the same values, who are the same hopes, and the connections between Russians and Germans, which has really a long history, very long history, have not been cut by this contouring between the European Union and Putin's regime. And I hope we could establish a strong media with good content, which could help Russians to save the normal picture of the world, normal picture of life. And the civic community in Russia, the community of human rights-minded, liberal-minded people, will still exist and even develop by our help. That was my aim, my mission, and my hope.
You mentioned the stronger cooperation between Russian journalists and between German journalists that you would like to create. Do you think that the view in Germany on Russia and vice versa is biased and is too based on stereotypes?
I think not critically, but I think yes. Before the war, there are a lot of stereotypes by which Russian lives was viewed from the glass of this so-called great Russian culture, great Russian history. But unfortunately, people who are fighting now in Ukraine, they in fact didn't read Tolstoy. If they read Leo Tolstoy, they would be against the war, because all his writings is that the war is the cruel and bloody thing which produces only grief for people. But for today, the situation changed absolutely, and there is another view that the Russian society is a society of cruel people with high level of violence. Yes, with very high level of violence and so on. But it's not true, because the regime had to collect the people for the army from the depressive undeveloped regions. There are very little people from Moscow, St. Petersburg. They don't want to go to fight. And the regime is looking for the very poor people, very depressed people, and so on and so forth. So I want to fight a little with such stereotyping, and also the problem of Russians for today is that the main threat of authoritarian propaganda for now is not disseminating some racism or another kinds of hate, but the high decreasing of trust to any institutions. Because ordinary Russian could tell you there is no any truth in our propaganda. But on the other side is propaganda too. We can trust nobody. And that is our mission, to explain the difference between the situation of normal media landscape, of course, with a kind of stereotypes, a kind of biases, and so on. But finally, free and with the normal discussion and the forcefully controlled propagandistic media.
All right. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you too. Thank you too, Julia.